By the winter of 1806, the French army was freezing, starving, and stuck in the thick Polish mud. Morale plummeted so far that desertion rates soared, and over 100 soldiers simply gave up, taking their own lives in the bitter cold. Napoleon Bonaparte had spent the previous year hammering the Austrians at Austerlitz and the Prussians at Jena. But the Russian First Army, commanded by General Bennigsen, remained in the field, stubbornly refusing to surrender. While in Warsaw, Napoleon began an affair with a young noblewoman named Marie Walewska. For Walewska and her fellow patriots, this wasn't merely a romance. It was a desperate political gambit. Since Poland had been wiped off the map by its neighbors in 1795, they hoped her influence could convince Napoleon to restore their nation's independence. The military tension culminated at the Battle of Eylau. Fought in a blinding snowstorm, neither side backed down. Entire corps lost their way and were cut to pieces by Russian cannon fire. By the time the fighting paused, both armies had lost roughly a third of their men to the carnage. For the first time since crowning himself emperor, Napoleon failed to secure a clear victory on the battlefield. Both sides covered up the true scale of their losses, but the whispers had already begun. The French army could be bled. To keep his European conquests intact, Napoleon desperately needed to force the Russians to the peace table. He needed a knockout blow, but with his supply lines stretched and his men exhausted, he was running out of time to deliver it. Months later, in the early summer of 1807, General Bennigsen finally saw an opening. Russian cavalry scouts reported finding a single, isolated French corps near the small town of Friedland. This map illustrates the battle lines that formed next. Bennigsen ordered his army to cross to the west bank of the Alais River to smash the isolated French forces. But by crossing the water, he forced his entire army to fight with its back against the steep riverbanks, cutting off their own escape routes. Commanding that isolated French corps was Marshal Lannes. Facing 46,000 Russians with just 16,000 men, Lannes sent an urgent message to Napoleon, then deployed a massive screen of skirmishers. He carefully yielded ground, hiding his true numbers, and keeping the massive Russian force locked in the pocket while he waited. Bennigsen had severely underestimated the marching speed of the Grand Army. Within hours, French reinforcements began pouring in, with the Emperor himself arriving at the front lines by noon. By trying to snap up an easy target, Bennigsen had unwittingly locked 46,000 Russian soldiers in a geographical death trap, wedged between a rapidly growing French army and an uncrossable river. At 5:30 p.m., 3 salvos from the French guns signaled the start of Napoleon's attack. General Senarmond advanced with 30 cannons, unleashing a dense, smoky barrage directly into the trapped Russian ranks. The French artillery blasted case shot at point-blank range, mowing down hundreds of men in minutes. As exploding shells rained down, the houses and wooden pontoon bridges in Friedland caught fire. The Russian army panicked, surging toward a river they could no longer easily cross. Men drowned trying to swim to safety, while others were killed or captured on the burning shoreline. In a single day, Bennigsen lost roughly 20,000 men, nearly 40% of his entire fighting force. This map shows how Europe was reconfigured following the treaties of Tilsit. Napoleon stripped Prussia of 1/3 of its territory, repurposing the land into the Kingdom of Westphalia and the Duchy of Warsaw, French-aligned satellites designed to project his power into the east. With the Russian army shattered and Prussia neutralized, Napoleon had secured his borders. The victory at Friedland eliminated his last major continental threat, leaving the French emperor as the undisputed master of Europe. With Europe pacified, Napoleon had only one major enemy left standing. But Great Britain remained securely across the English Channel, protected by the massive Royal Navy fleet. Napoleon's solution was the continental system, an economic blockade banning British ships from French-controlled ports to starve Britain financially. But smuggling routes quickly punctured the barrier, while the Royal Navy simply blockaded French ports in return, securing total naval dominance. Commanding the continent had given Napoleon a false sense of invulnerability. He believed he could dictate the global economy by force, but instead, he created a self-inflicted wound that drained his own empire. Desperate to plug the holes in his failing system, Napoleon turned to the Iberian Peninsula. He demanded that Britain's longtime ally, Portugal, shut its ports and join the blockade. When Portugal resisted, French troops, supported by Spain, marched aggressively down the peninsula. In November 1807, they occupied Lisbon without a fight, forcing the Portuguese royal family to flee to Brazil. The easy entry into Lisbon proved deceptive. The aggressive occupation ignited a fierce local resistance that spiraled into the Peninsular War, a resource-draining conflict that would bleed the French military for years. At Friedland, Napoleon had masterfully exploited a geographic mistake to destroy a trapped enemy. But in his economic war, he became the one trapped by his own overreach, deploying armies to solve trade disputes. By shattering the Russian army, Napoleon secured the total control he had always wanted. But that very same power allowed him to enact a ruinous economic policy and launch an unwinnable war in Spain, laying the groundwork for his own eventual downfall.